This week we have the Pasha of the week is two Pashas. Two Pashas joined together. And as the Rebbe explains that when two Pashas are joined together, they cease to be two Pashas. They become one Pasha. This is significant because everything teaches us something. When you have two Pashas, why are the Pashas divided? Because they have different themes, different principal messages. That's why they divide it into two. When you have two Pashas that originally they are two, which means they have different messages, and then all of a sudden they can be joined as one, that means that these two different messages have a joining point that they contribute to each other. So this is what permits them to be joined together. To identify or to focus in on the central point of a Pasha is very difficult because each one of the two Pashas contains many episodes, many facets, many aspects. So the Rebbe says that the straightforward, the easiest way to focus in on a Pasha is by analyzing its name. Because the name, the Lashon HaKodesh, is the focal point. It expresses the center, the nucleus of the Pasha. Because everything in the name in Lashon HaKodesh represents the essence. Even though there are many phases, many facets to it, and you may find it difficult sometimes to relate to different facets, but nevertheless, everything in the Pasha really is represented, is contained in its name. And therefore, if we analyze the names and then see how these two names complement one another, then we will be able to draw the teaching of the Pasha. The first Pasha is called Matoss. Matoss means sticks. And of course, in this Pasha it refers to the heads of the tribes. The Jewish tribes are called Matoss. The Jewish tribes are also alternately called Shvotim, Shevet. Shevet and Mato is the same item. The difference is Shevet is when it is soft. It's a branch attached to the tree. That's a Shevet. When this Shevet is detached from the tree and dries up and becomes hard, then it becomes a matter, then it becomes a stick. You don't have problems with English, right? Neither one of the Davids. Then it becomes a stick. Clearly, the difference between a root, a shevet, a branch, a soft branch that is connected to its root tree, and it's actually drawing sustenance from the root tree. It's a living tree, and it is much more viable than a dry stick. On the other hand, something happens to this shevet when it dries up and becomes a stick. When it is a shevet, when it is a branch, it is pliable. It can be bent. It is pliable. It can be bent. It can assume different shapes. It can give. It has a give. The expression is. A stick, once it dries up, does not have a give. It's always steadfast. It has its shape, and that's what it is. So on the one hand, a shevet, being connected to the tree, has a resource from which to draw, and it has sap, it has life, and you can tell what it is. It's a branch of a tree. Once it dries up, it loses its quality in that respect. It becomes dry like a rock. Like you can't even tell that it's a source in the tree, that it has life at one time. It's just its physical presence. That's all you have. How does this translate in terms of avodas Hashem? In terms of Jewish life, in terms of the Jewish neshama, of the Jewish soul. When the neshama, we spoke about many times, and you learned in Tanya, every Yid has a neshama, a godly soul. This godly soul, prior to its descent into the physical world, prior to descent in association to the body, it was in a very glorious place. And it enjoyed tremendous appreciation of godliness. After coming down into the body and being involved in dealing with worldly matters, this is sort of like being dissociated, broken away. It's like the brains being broken away from the tree. Not chas v'sholom to say that the neshama is in fact broken away, but it doesn't sense its connection. It does not have a sense of appreciation of godliness. It's impossible for it to appreciate godliness because everything that the neshama appreciates at this point has to be filtered by the group, by the body. The body has to agree with it. The body has to be able to accept it. Anything that the body is not able to relate to, the neshama also is not able to appreciate, to experience anymore. This is the effect of the neshama joining the body. We spoke about this many times. Excuse me? The fact of the neshama joining the body. Surely the neshama is definitely making its presence felt, and it's constantly urging the person to something. But the reason that full-fledged, that full richness of knowing what godliness is just saying, don't drown in the world. But it doesn't say what the other thing is. So he's like a dry stick in a sense. It's still a stick. What is a stick? A stick is a piece of wood that grew on a tree. You can still tell, essentially, ultimately, that it has a root in the tree. But the similarity between its growing pattern on the tree and its state after it dries up is very, very faint, very little. And thus, what is the means for the neshama to maintain its path now in this world and to stay true to its source and true to its mission? It is only by utilizing the nature of a stick, of being stubborn, of being decisive, of facing down opposition, despite the fact that it does not really, it cannot shed light on it, it cannot really explain itself. But nevertheless, it knows the truth, and he stubbornly sticks to it. That's the nature of the avodah of a Yidden in this world. No matter how much we understand, all understanding is only, in effect, convincing us that this is the truth. But to say that we are experiencing it, we're experiencing the world. There's a famous saying of the Barditchever Road, Rabbi Barditchever. I'm sure everybody heard. If not, Rabbi Barditchever was actually a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe, of the Baal HaTanya. Together they learned by the musician Maggid. Rabbi Barditchever from Barditchever. A very big tzaddik, and he was also a very deeply emotional person. Like it says that when the Talmidim, the students of the Maggid, were listening to a Torah, listening to a teaching from the Maggid, they all had different reactions to it. And it says the only one who was able to stand there and listen to the Torah from beginning to end and not be so excited and lose himself was the Alter Rebbe. The B'tzim Rabbi Yitzchok became so emotional that when he heard the Torah, that he would just lose it. He was a very emotional, warm person, besides being a great scholar and being a great tzaddik. Rabbi Yitzchok,
in what way he would lose it when he would hear the Torah? You know, like how would it express itself?
He wasn't able to continue on the concentration. He would get so excited. He would lose it. And sometimes he even had to walk out. I'm sorry?
The Murasaken was the more young than the students of the Magi, no?
I'm sorry?
The Murasaken was the more young, the more small.
The youngest.
The Alter Rebbe was the youngest. Yes, the youngest among the students. Actually, there was another student who also was able to follow through the whole teaching, but that student ultimately lost it in a different way. He couldn't carry on a normal organized life. He became what's called a traveler. He never settled down any place. The Wolfer, he is known as the Wolfer. Sometimes you get familiar. Anyway, so Rabbi Barditchever also had as a central theme in his avodah, he was constantly defending the Jewish people. He was known as the Oyev Yisrael. He was constantly defending Meilitz Yesh. What?
Yeah, this not been this attack that he witnessed,
right? He was always defending the Jewish people, and even to the point where one time he was walking in Barditchev in town on Yom Kippur, and he sees a Yid eating. And so Rabbi Barditchev turns to him, surely you forgot it's Yom Kippur. No, Rebbe, I know it's Yom Kippur. Surely you're not aware that Yom Kippur you're not allowed to eat. I certainly do. Well, you must be very sickly that you must eat. No, I'm fine and well. So Rabbi Barditchever turns to Hamedosh and said, Rebbeinu Shalom, look what a wonderful nation you have. They're so honest. He can't say a lie, even if it embarrasses him. That's what Rabbi Barditchever. So Rabbi Barditchever once stood up and he said, Rebbeinu Shalom, he said, what do you want from the Jewish people? All the taivas, all the lusts, all the desires of the world, you put in front of them. Right there. And the Gan Eden, and Olam Haba, and all the good things, the godly things, you put in a book. And you want that this book, they should conquer the Yetzer Hara. He says, why don't you try them in the reverse way? Put the Gan Eden and the godly things and all the good things, the ruchnistic things in front of them. And put the Yetzer Hara into a book. And then see which one they'll choose. So the reality that the neshama that we are faced with is the reality of the world. And no matter how much we understand about it, we still, the only way to conquer it, the only way to lead a steadfast life is by stubbornly following it. It's never going to be that we are going to eliminate the vision of taiva and the vision of worldly interests. We will see godliness. It's not going to happen. Until Mashiach comes, it's not going to happen. No matter how much we learn and daven and try and work, it's not going to happen. Which means that the neshama here is involved in the avodah that is illustrated by the word of a stick, by the term of a stick. It's part of a tree, but it's long dissociated from the tree. It only remembers something. One time I was in a tree, but now I'm a dry stick. So you would think that it seems a lopsided type of thing. What's the point? He was a living tree, a living branch of a tree. And you bring it down into the goof, and you make a stick out of it. So what's the point? What's the point? For this comes the next parsha. The next parsha, the joining parsha. The joining parsha is called Massey, journeys, travels. What is the principle of travels? Essentially, here in this parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu lists and recaptures the entire journey of the Jewish people from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, when they first left Egypt. When they left Egypt, they were a nation that was first born as a nation, knew nothing of its nationhood, knew nothing what it stands for, and knew nothing what its life is supposed to be, what its mission is. Through all these journeys, until it reached this point where this parsha is, right across the Yarden, across the Jordan, ready to cross the Jordan River to go into Eretz Yisrael. This is the end of the journey with Eden, with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu finished his task at this point, as you know, and Yeshua took over, and Yeshua is the one who took the Eden across the Yarden. During all of these journeys, tremendous things took place. Things, changes took place with the Jewish people. They saw enormous miracles. They experienced godly revelation. And ultimately, the most important thing is that they received personally the Torah from Hashem. And now they carry this Torah. This is what they're going to carry to all eternity. The Torah, as we've discussed many times, the Torah is not merely a book that tells us what to do and not to do. Because in terms of what yes and what not to do, it was known already before. As the Gemara says, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov also already knew the Torah essentially. They knew the mitzvahs. How did they know it? In their profound wisdom, they were able to identify, to understand the mitzvahs. And they fulfilled them. It says Avraham Avinu kept all the mitzvahs. It says on the Torah. It says, Vayishmei mishmarti mitzvosech v'koiseh v'seroiseh. Avraham kept my mitzvahs and the decrees and so everything. This was because of Avraham's supreme wisdom And he was able to identify this and to learn it and to fulfill it. And Yitzchak and Yankov, and even the Shvatim, even the 12 tribes, and even in Mitzrayim, the Shevet Levi, it says, continued to learn Torah throughout the entire period in Mitzrayim. This is why the Shevet Levi was never subjugated into slavery, because they were in this Medrash learning Torah. It's exactly what happened. So what is the gift of Torah? The gift of Torah is not just to know how to behave and what to do and not to do. The gift of Torah is that Hashem had given Himself to us. That's the principle. That this brought Hashem's presence into the world. In contrast of us being in the world and know how to behave in the world. Know how to behave in the world means that we are away, we're dissociated, we're in a different place, we're in the world. The Torah means that Hashem put Himself in with us, which is way beyond what our fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yankov had. And all this we acquired, we received as a result of this journey, starting from Mitzrayim throughout the entire 42 Massoyes, throughout the entire journey in the desert, all the way to the point of coming to across the Eretz Yisrael.
You're saying Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov didn't have Hashem in the Torah?
Right. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov Torah was something that a human being, albeit an extraordinary human being, was able to understand. Whereas the Torah that we have is beyond the human being. It's something that Hashem Himself gave.
That happened in the separation at the Mount
That's
Sinai?
right. That's right. It's a completely different thing, different power. And one place where this is demonstrated is in the fact that the mitzvah that Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov did, even if they used a physical object to do the mitzvah, the physical object was not affected by the mitzvah. It remains a plain physical object. Whereas the mitzvahs that we do, the physical object itself becomes affected. Like tefillin become holy. A Sefer Torah is holy, even though it's a piece of parchment, because there is a godly power in our mitzvahs. When we do mitzvahs, it's not just a human being doing the mitzvahs. Hashem is doing the mitzvah with us. And this was accomplished by Yidden as a result of these journeys. This couldn't have happened in one shot. This is called a gradual and a systemic movement upwards. The neshama, the holy neshama, the way it is in Gan Eden, the way it is in its highest levels of comprehension and appreciation of godliness, cannot make this kind of strides, this kind of moves. This is what's expressed in Chassidus as being oimed. Oimed means standing steady in one place. The neshama does not stand in one place. It can rise higher and higher, but rising higher means it's like one learns learns more and understands it better, but not rising completely from a state of slavery into a state of royalty. That's a completely different rise. That couldn't take place then. When was it possible? What enabled this to happen? What facilitated this type of Massey, of a journey, of a constant move? That the neshama is no longer oimed, no longer standing still, but moving, and this move is endless. it can move to the point where it can receive the Torah from Hashem, and it can go higher and higher, higher than itself, higher than its own source. That became possible when the neshama came down and became a stick. When it came down into this world. And this world, this is where it became possible. And I want to discuss this a little bit. What's so special about this? And what makes it possible?
How do you explain the inner finding if they are really moving?
There is two types of movement. There's a movement that's called relative movement, where one step is closely related to the other, and then there is a jump across, an unrelated movement, a move that is no longer related to the original place where it came from.
So finding is called when it is related.
When it's, no matter how you move, it's still related to before. And this avodah that is incumbent on us, which is our form of avodah, which is called the avodah of a shevet, of a mate. It's the avodah of a mate, it's the avodah of a stick, which means, as we explained before, there's no way that we can fully experience godliness to the point where we say, okay, this is me. I really experience, this is the truth that I live with. It is always, ultimately, a conscious decision, not because of my personal experience, but because of my personal conviction that this is the truth. So in effect, the avodah becomes something that I'm forcing myself. It's called iskafia. I'm forcing myself to follow it, even though the reality as I see it is the world, and I ignore that reality. I say, no, that's not the reality. Reality is the way I understand it in myself, the way I learn and what I know, and what I believe. That's the reality. That takes tremendous strength. And it takes strength to the point where, as I said, it's not, you can't even begin to debate it. You just have to stubbornly be convinced and follow your conviction. Any question? What facilitates? What makes it possible? How does this actually work? This is something similar to what we learned yesterday in class. It's a thing that repeats itself. In this physical world, where the neshama, where we do not see godliness at all, and we see only worldliness, and then, despite the fact that we see only worldliness, and the worldliness seems to be real, and with all its reality, we still see that that's not the reality. Without the fact that we see what is the reality, we see that it's not the reality. Which means that here we see godliness at a level which is beyond experience, which is beyond vision. We see that which we don't see.
How can you see godliness? It's not, you mean see like with the eye or?
No, you don't. You see with your mind's eye.
Even some normal that was studying
Right, that's right. Even certainly the Chassidus it becomes much more vivid. But every Yid has emunah. And in his emunah, he recognizes a truth that he has no direct connection to. He has no direct way of defining it and explaining it and experiencing it. And that's his reality, and that's what he perceives. In the process of journeying, of moving from one step to the other, there is an interesting and important phenomenon, how movement takes place. Like we said before, movement means that you come to a point where you dissociate to the previous space spot where you came from. To illustrate and to explain this point, I want to use a simple little story, which I think a very long time ago I already told you the story. Analyze it, and perhaps we'll be able to relate and understand this point from it. The story is an interesting story. The Rebbe Maharash was the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was the grandfather of the previous Rebbe. He was a very jolly boy, very happy and energetic boy when he was a young kid. So one time, he and his friends were playing in the courtyard of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the Rebbe at the time, of his father. They were playing in the courtyard. And the game consisted of, there was a tall ladder standing over there, a very tall ladder. And they had to climb up the ladder. And the challenge was, who would climb up higher? So the boys were climbing and climbing and climbing, and at a certain point they would get scared and come down. You remember the story? Huh? He would climb up and climb and come down. And this went on for a long time. Many boys tried, and this one a little higher, a little lower, but ultimately they all would come down. They wouldn't make it to the top. Then came the Rebbe Maharash's turn. And he went up the ladder, went all the way to the top, and came down. Like nothing happened. Like Zalman would do. That's what Zalman would do. Nothing, he just went up and came down. Later on, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe at the time, noticed this whole game, what was taking place. Afterwards, he asked the Rebbe Maharash, the son, tell me, how come all the boys had to stop in the middle someplace, and you made it to the top? So he answered that all the boys would look back down. As they were climbing the ladder, they would look back down. And when you look down, you get scared and you come down. I didn't look down. I only looked up. So I went all the way to the top, and I was able to make it. That's a story. So now we have to understand why, in fact, did it take a Rebbe to realize this piece of wisdom. This is common knowledge. Everybody knows this. When boys climb up a tall thing, they told each other, don't look down, don't look down, don't look down, and then they look down. Everybody knows this is not a secret. Why did it take a Rebbe to be able to follow through on it. You remember the explanation? That's what you should remember.
I was always listening to the wrong part of the story.
It's all right. What is the reason? What's the explanation? The explanation is as follows. This ladder is standing on the ground. So therefore the ground is the base for this ladder. As the boys are climbing up, they still sense that really what's supporting them? The base, the ground. And therefore they're constantly looking back. Is the base still there? Am I still supported? Is it still there? And as he's climbing up higher and higher and higher, he feels less the sense of support from the base. And you know something? He's compelled to look back. Is the earth still there? He has no choice. He's compelled. It's natural. Because he can't orient himself in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the air. He can't stand in the middle of the air. So he has to go back and say, where's the earth that's supporting him? So he must look down. And if he looks down and sees the earth a little too far, that he can't really fathom it, he can't really surmise it in his mind, he has to come down. Huh? He cannot really relate to it. It's too far down, he has to come down. He doesn't feel the support of the earth anymore. It's too far. He has to come down. That's the nature of the thing. The Rebbe, being a Rebbe, having the neshama of a Rebbe, he didn't relate to the earth as his support. Wherever he is supported by the Meibesh. He supported Hashem, not the earth. So when he is climbing up, it's in the middle of the air, so big deal, it's in the middle of the air. Wherever I am, that's where I am. My support is with me all the time. So therefore he didn't have to look down into the earth and see where his base is. His base was with him wherever he went. That's why he was able to go up and come down. Compelled, forced. In the process of a person's progress, every step begins with some base. We begin with some kind of, at some point, with some prejudice. Like I'm beginning to learn a shtickle Gemara, and I'm on the basis of the level of learning and understanding that I have till now. On that basis, I'm learning this. But then, when I find that this which I'm learning now does not fit into the format, into the framework that I'm used to, so then there are two options. And these are very important options. Either I give up on my framework and I lose it, I say, no, in that framework this is not understandable, but I want to understand this. So I'm giving up in that framework and I'm going into this. In the meantime, I'm in no man's land. I'm middle of the air. I don't have a framework. I don't have a means by which to relate to things and put things in perspective. Until I formulate a new framework and a new perspective. This is the process of movement. That's a true movement. If one insists on staying within the framework that he came with, that he started with, then it's not going to be real movement. He's always going to be hampered and held back to stay within the framework and say, I can only relate and understand and accept those things, that make sense from the position where I came from. I cannot move away from that. This is my home base, so to speak. This is the difference between Oimed and Mahalach. Mahalach is uniquely, exclusively possible in this world. In the Ruchnistic and spiritual world, it's not possible. Mahalach is possible here only. Why is it possible here? I'll come back in a minute, but this question I want to put in so that you will know we'll come back to it. In other words, this process of pursuing, like I said, the avoid principle in this world for the neshama is that of a matter, a stick, which means even though I'm reaching the end of my understanding and it doesn't fit into my framework, and therefore from the perspective of my experience, perspective of my personal choice, I should say that's it, I'm not going any further because I can't relate to it. But then I say no. I made up my mind, this is the pursuit, this is the right place, this is the right thing to go after. This is as a stick. I can't understand it because I don't have a means by which to understand it. But this is what I'm going to pursue. Even though this means that I have to actually step out of the framework and the context that I'm used to, that I already acquired, and start going into a new context, a new perception, a new viewpoint. Like a person climbing up a mountain. When you stand on the bottom of the mountain, you can see a certain distance. And you can't imagine that you can see any further than that. This is what you can see. Oh, you have better eyes than Matoss. Then you make one step up. Oh, wow, wait a second. A completely different view. Completely different view. Because now you're looking at it not from the bottom of the mountain, but from the top of the mountain. From a completely different perspective. And that's what a movement is. A movement means like a person walking up the steps. A person walking up the steps. What is the method of walking? He picks up one foot. The other foot is still on the lower step. So he's still connected to the lower step. But he hasn't made the step until he dissociates, breaks away with the second foot. He has to move the second foot away from the lower step. As long as he remains connected to the lower step, he hasn't made the step. He can stretch and stretch and stretch. He's still basically on the bottom. He never gets there. In order to get there, he has to take both feet away from there. When you take both feet away from there, so then, wait a second, where am I? I'm giving it up completely. This is my reality. That's what movement is. I'm giving it up completely. I'm coming to a place that I don't understand. But I know that this is the place I want to be. Like a stick. Stubbornly and steadfastly. And then I begin to reorient myself and create a completely new base. Where? At the summit of the mountain. A completely different place. And I begin to see the world and see life and see Torah and see Yiddishkeit from a totally different perspective. And then after a while, when this becomes the simple worldly reality, I start climbing the next step. This is called movement. This movement is possible. This is possible only through the process of a matter. Because a shevet, one who is constantly experiencing and he feels his understanding and all, he can't make that move. It's something that's like a matter. I'm just going. There's more to talk about it. I just want to explain this next point, which will put the whole thing in perspective. What in fact gives this matter this dry stick, all of us here, the capability, the power, the strength to pursue this path. We have umpteen questions. We have umpteen questions. We do and we don't understand. What gives us the strength to follow through on this path? One principle. And this is what the matter is. The recognition, not the full understanding, and not the experience, not the feel, the knowledge, the clear knowledge that God is there also. He's not limited to be here. He's there too. And you know something? This is where I'm going to be a little bit closer to him. I'll have a little bit more understanding of what he is. And this is what facilitates, what enables this stick to go through and break away from its base, break away from its orientation, and go into in no man's land, an undefined territory, because he knows that wherever he goes, Hashem is there. Like the Rebbe knew when he's climbing these steps, that he doesn't have to look back to the ground. He can be in middle air and the Rebbe is there too.
What would be the explanation as to why?
One?
What would be the explanation as to why in the higher levels, like the neshama without the body, cannot grow in a level in a way of?
Okay, so that's what I'm coming. This is what facilitates it. This clear knowledge that the Rebbe Hashem is there. And this is possible only in the state of a matter. Because in the state of a matter, where there isn't a personal experience of godliness, where godliness is known from only one base, one perspective. And the perspective is not how I understand him, how I experience him, what makes sense to me. The perspective is only one thing. That is the absolute truth. That is the only truth. This is how, if you take a look in the beginning of Mitzvah, now we're going to finish the Rambam, we're going to start turning to the beginning of the Rambam. This is exactly how the Rambam describes this principle. That knowing God, we know because who emes. This is the emes, this is the truth. Ve'in emes kamitosi, there's no truth like his truth. In other words, if it were dependent on how much of it I understand, how I appreciate, how I experience it, then it would still, you could move, but it'll be within your own, the limits within your own understanding. But since it's completely beyond, to start with, outside of my understanding, it is relating to the godly truth as it is in its essential truth. That there is no limit. And with that, one can go and come out of Mitzrayim, receive the Torah, go into Eretz Yisrael, build the Beis Hamikdash, and there's no limit. And this is how our Rebbe explains this, the principle of these two sedres, Matoss and Massey, being joined together in one seder. Because what facilitates the Massey is Matoss. Practically speaking, in our daily effort here in the yeshiva and in Mitzvah outside of the yeshiva, when you pursue to further in life. There is always going to be challenges. And there's always going to be a need and a demand and necessity to Massey, to move on to the next step. Every step is a new step, a complete changeover from what it was before. You can't build on the previous step at all. Just want to warn you, I mean, you're not children, but you understand, married and not married are worlds apart. Worlds. And you can't build a marriage life on the basis of what you knew when you were like on board. You can't. You have to start relearning all over from the beginning. And then you continue on in life. And a person has to be Massey, has to move on, has to move into the new position completely and orient himself and acclimate and become one with it and then go on to the next frame. And in that process, and just like here in Yeshiva, you know, you learn, you labor, you try to understand the Tosfos, you try to understand whatever you're trying to understand in Chassidus, and whatever you're trying to acclimate, to work through in yourself, and then you come to the end of your path, and you say, Rebbeinu Shalom, I can't go any further. What happens then? Then you say, Rebbeinu Shalom, you take me over there. You carry me over this. I'm now in the middle of the air. I don't know what to do next. You take over, like I explained to you yesterday. That is the normal path. And you know something? This is how it happens to everyone. This is how it happens. We carry our burden up to a certain point, as long as we can still relate to it and understand it. But we come to a point where I can't make the jump, but I want to be there. I'm like a matter. This is where I want to go. And that point, you say, Rebbeinu Shalom, you take over from here. And that's when you make the hop, not when you make the jump. And then it continues on.
How do we not make the mistake of not knowing when we reach that point when we really need?
You don't make mistakes. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to do everything you can first, on your own. Try to get in there and try to understand it, try to acclimate and get to it. And be to absorb this, everything that you can absorb, and then the Rebbe helps, and it takes you over the hump. And when you get over the hump, all of a sudden, you find yourself in a new bright world. All of a sudden, it becomes light. Oh, that's what it means. That's what it means. Oh, I understand. Oh, that's what it means. So Hashem should help each one of us here, that we should find the strength to go up to the summit, and then the Rebbe will take us over the hump, and then we'll start climbing the next set of steps.
Right before you finish, can you tell me why the kids? What's the reason that the neshama Lamaila cannot be a malach?
Because in Lamaila the neshama is working with its own koiches, with its own comprehension, and therefore there's a limit. Here it's working not on its own comprehension because it doesn't have any. It's going on the basis of knowing what the truth is. That's it. That's right. Okay. Hatzlacha. He does whatever he wants. You finish and you begin. somebody will begin from the Halacha, begin